welcome back. This is the night 4 of the Synergy 766 build. I'm hoping to put the final touches on this bird tonight. Aside from the actual head setup, I'll do that on my own. That's not it's not important to the review of the actual frame. Hoping to get the last few odds and ends and the tail built tonight, and then do the setup tomorrow while the videos are processing. And hopefully, if the weather cooperates, maiden this bird this weekend. The very next step in our manual, again, we are following the manual to the T. We left off, we had the rotor head completely assembled and the swash links created. The next step in the manual is the pitch links. Now, I do want to point out that the 41 millimeters recommended spacing on these pitch links is a guideline that was obtained by Matt and a few of us doing the alpha kits, figuring out where everyone started with the same 21.5 millimeters on the swash and then adjusted the pitch links to be relative to our particular servos. You know, not all servos have the exact same height, so swash is going to ride a little bit lower, a little bit higher. So if your 41 millimeters is a starting point, and you'll adjust from there, it's no big deal. As long as the swash is level and the swash travel is at the swash links are at 21.5 millimeters, the swash is going to be in the middle of the travel, and the pitch links will be what they are. 41 is just a starting point. Don't get too bent up on it. And with that in mind, I did take my calipers and I zeroed them out and ran them out to 41 millimeters exactly. And I'm going to create the pitch links the exact same way I did with the swash links. These are also turnbuckles. They have the same ridge denoting the left-hand thread side. It's going to be real nice to get these exactly to 41 millimeters and go from there. So I'm going to cut the camera and make up my pitch links, and we'll be right back. There you have it, 2 pitch links. Inside space at 41 millimeters on the dot. Again, that's just a starting point. When we put everything on the head and do the actual head setup, you'll adjust these. There's really cool, and I'll show it to you here in a little bit when I put the frame back up on here, but the one of the new additions to the Synergy 766 head are 0 pitch marks on the head. So, and we tested these with the alpha kits. They're extremely accurate. So it becomes real easy to first level your swash at the very stage in your flybarless unit, and then use those 0 pitch marks to fine tune your head. And then if you pay attention when you're snapping the links on the pitch to get the left-handed thread sides in the same orientation either way, adjusting the pitch links will be uniform. So rotate, turning them the same direction on both links will make the same kind of adjustment. This makes it a little extra second. Put them on, snap them on the same orientation will save you a few pieces of headache. Now, if I remember correctly, the very next step is to start building the tail, starting with the torque tube and the torque tube bearings. So I'm going to stop the camera and change things around a little bit because the boom is pretty long on this bird, and get set up so I can start showing you the tail parts. Alright, as you can see, I've got the tail parts all laid out for me. The 766 does have a larger outside diameter boom, so a few things had to get a little bit bigger. First and foremost, you might notice the first piece, another piece of functional bling. Rather than the standard plastic control rod guides we've used in the other Synergy kits, we now have a nice aluminum guide with a 2mm bolt to clamp it, with a Delrin insert for the control rod to go through. It's very nice, very functional, looks really good on the model. Due to the increased length of the boom, Matt has opted to go with 3 torque tube bearings. Now, each of these holders has a bearing preset in it with a rubber O-ring already on it. There are 3 of these. Just like with any other model, the actual distance between these bearings on the torque tube is not important, as long as the distance between them is not equidistant. You want to break up the distance, have them unequal distance lengths apart to help cut down the chance of harmonic vibration. So I'm going to use a medium CA. You got to be really careful with CA. You don't want to let it wick up into these bearings. I like using the medium CA here because I can control it a little better. Let it partially cure before I even put the bearing in place. Talk about that in detail later. The tail box itself has not changed a whole lot other than getting bigger, obviously to accommodate the larger Mod 1.25 gears. These are larger and more teeth count. We'll go on that in detail in a minute. But the biggest change to the tail box is Matt has redesigned the tail bell crank. He put a lot of time and thought into this bell crank, worked with the ratio, took his experience with other models, and optimized the geometry of this tail bell crank to really increase the efficiency of the tail performance and throws. I think you're going to really like your flyball units are going to love the tail numbers with this guy. And again, the 766 comes standard with the metal tail pitch slider that was first introduced with the E7 SE, and uses a 6mm output shaft on the tail. I'll go into that in a little more detail when I break that down in a minute. The tail hub and grips have not changed. It's a standard hardened steel hub with thrusted tail bearings on each grip. This is an area you're going to see me use red Loctite on reassembly. Do not want to lose a tail grip in flight, but I'll break those down, lubricate the thrust bearings. We'll go into that in detail in a minute. Tail fin, obviously a little bigger than you would as you would expect with a larger bird. And then, of course, with the longer boom, you've got longer boom supports and a longer control rod. Like the other kits, we now have these aluminum rod ends that we will be epoxying onto the end of our control rod. All of these links, the 2 links here and the 2 links on the pitch slider, will be sized with our Bodo sizer. This is an area that 10 minutes spent here getting the sizing on these 4 links right will equal hours of tail tuning savings later. It's just so easy to mess with the tail if there's any drag. So we're gonna really fine tune those. The next thing that changed with the 766 is all of Matt's other birds, the torque tube ends inserted inside the torque tube and had a bolt that went through. The problem you have there, as Matt found, was while the machine shops do a really great job of getting the outside diameter even all the way around, the inside diameter of these can vary. So to counteract and to eliminate the issues caused by periodically having an odd size inside diameter, we now have an outside captured gear chuck. Now this is nice because, like I said, they do a real good job of getting the outside diameter even. So now we can trust that everything is true. You have so the torque tube chuck goes over the outside. You have a pin that goes through the middle, locks everything, and then you have this nice Delrin retainer that's going to pop over the everything to hold the pin in place. Now, while this does go together really well and holds everything tight, this is another application for your green Loctite. There's never a reason for this to come apart. If you do not use Loctite on this and you ever develop any play in that pin, the pin's just going to slowly eat away at the torque tube and eventually you're just going to lose your tail. So this is another place where definitely highly recommend the use of green Loctite. There's no bearings in that area. It's safe. Put some green on there, put it together, and let it go. But you're definitely going to want to make sure you put the torque tube bearings on first. I'm going to go ahead and cut the camera. I'm going to CA the bearings and green Loctite the torque tube ends off camera, just because it's a little tedious work and I don't think you need a step-by-step guide on how to CA bearings. I'm sure you've done that. We come back, I will have the torque tube ready, show you its completed version, and then I will tell you how the trick I used to get the torque tube into the boom. Welcome back. As you can see, I've got the tail box completely torn down here. Off camera, I did a little prep work on some of the parts that require epoxy. Those are setting up. I will circle back to those after they've had plenty of time to cure. I will get those in. I will show you what I did, I promise. While that's curing, I wanted to move on, get a little work done. As you can see, I have completely dismantled this tail box. All the parts and pieces are pretty straightforward from any other Synergy kit. You have a one-piece center tail hub. Now this is a new gear for the 766. This is a massive 24 tooth mod 1.25 Delrin CNC cut mushroom gear and corresponding 24 tooth bevel gear. Like all other Synergy kits, we talked about it before, there is a counter pin that goes through the bevel gear through the output shaft that retains the bevel gear, as well as a set screw that goes in the end of the tail shaft to retain the pin. I strongly recommend you tear it all the way down like I did, so that you can take your set screw and run it through the complete travel, just to make sure. That's a couple of pretty small holes they have to drill and tap. You want to be sure that there's no chips or machine debris in that travel, that set screw, or it could impede its ability to hold that pin. There's a lot riding on that pin. You want to make sure you do everything you can to help it out. Now, there are a couple of shims that go on either side of the spacer. The shims are nice because depending upon how your gear wears, you may need to adjust the mesh. And you can move these shims around, stack them behind the gear, stack them in front of the gear, put them all on the end of the spacer, however you need to do to fine-tune the mesh on the tail gears as they wear. We're going to build them per the manual. You have one on the outside of the gear and the one on the inside of the gear. And check the mesh there. But those shims are meant to be relocated as necessary to properly adjust the mesh. It's a nice feature that Matt gives you, so you can from the factory fine-tune the mesh of the tail box if you don't like the way it's going. The side plates have radial bearings built into them. These are machined, pre-fit. The bearings are press fit. There's no need to really take them out. Just do your typical look them over, make sure everything is spinning freely and everything's in good shape. I have done a parts count. Everything's accounted for as to be expected. I'm going to reassemble. I am going to use red Loctite on this ball, and I'm going to use red Loctite on that pin, that set screw that holds that pin in. Other than that, I'll assemble with blue. This is something that, depending upon how often you crash, you could have to take apart a couple of times. So you don't want to use red unnecessarily. I am going to cut the camber, reassemble the tail box, and when I come back, we'll talk about the tail hub. Well, there it is, all back together. As I expected, the shims in the stock locations, one on the outside of the gear, one on the inside of the gear, worked great. Mesh is good, just a tiny little bit of lash there. Everything feels very smooth. It's nice and it feels very smooth. The pitch slider is reassembled. As you can see, there's absolutely no drag on that at all, which is what you want. That brass is doing its job. Now I'm still going to put a couple drops of tri-flow on that shaft every few flights to keep it flow nice and smooth as it picks up debris and that brass begins to wear. Bronze wears a little bit, but as you can see, it's good. I did take my Bodo sizer and size these links just a little bit. Again, like I said, a few minutes spent on this and a few minutes spent on the links for the control rod will save you hours of tail tuning problems. It's really worth the effort. The tail should be just about that smooth, even with the blade grips on it. It's very important that you take time to do that. One note, this is a boom that is designed to be pinned, so the absolute forwardmost bolt metric cap screw on the right side of the tail box is extra long because it will go all the way in and capture the boom through a pinhole we're going to do a little later. So there's no Loctite on that bolt yet because I'll need to remove that bolt to mark my boom. Set that aside for a minute. Next I'm going to tear down my blade grips and get everything pulled apart for inspection and lubrication, and I'll be back in a minute. Alright, as you can see, I've got the tail torn down. Everything here you would expect to find. There's our hardened steel center hub with a set screw. CNC aluminum blade grips, which are really nice. Extra addition to these blade grips, you may or may not be able to see on the camera, but Matt has added portholes to grease the thrust bearings on the tail. So you can lubricate these tail bearings without pulling the assembly apart, which is a nice touch. Inside you'll find everything you expect. You have an outer radial bearing, shim, thrust bearing, an inner radial bearing, and then vice versa on the other side. Inner radial bearing, thrust bearing, shim, outer radial bearing, and then a washer with a metric cap screw holding the blade grip on, basically a spindle bolt for the tail. Nothing super critical here. No reinventing the wheel. This is this is the same tail hub that has proven to be a absolute workhorse on the rest of the Synergy models, so we reused it. These parts are shared with the other models, so if you have more than one Synergy kit, you can stock these bearings and extra parts and be good for a couple of builds. I'm going to, as before, all my swash balls and pitch link balls will be reaffixed with red Loctite. I will use my Bodo lube on the thrust bearings and assemble the tail pitch. I'm actually going to use red on these tail pitch spindle bolts. You do not want to lose a blade grip in flight, so drop a red on that just to be safe. It's not an overly large bolt. Breaking that loose shouldn't be too bad. I'm going to lubricate and rebuild off camera. When I come back, I'll have a completed tail box, and we'll talk about what's next. Alright, there it is. Tail box complete. Nice and smooth. Very, very little drag on that tail box. I like the way that feels. Everything is nice and smooth. There's no binding. That's going to be a really well performing tail. There's a little bit of a snag at the extremes. I might take my boater sizer to that one more time just to be 100% sure. Like I said, 10 minutes spent being sure this is good is worth hours later. Set that aside for now. I can't put this on the boom just yet. My epoxy hasn't had enough ample time to cure, so we're going to deviate from the manual slightly. The manual has us putting this on next, as well as the control rod and the boom and control rod supports, but the epoxy is still curing on those, so we're going to circle back to that and give that a little more time. In the meantime, we are going to go ahead and assemble the battery tray. This is pretty straightforward. New to the 766 is the first time Matt has offered a battery tray stock. This is a nice addition. Not only does it give you a way to quickly change your batteries, but built into the side frame are 4 different positions for this battery lock to engage the frame. So you have 4 different positions in the tray, plus this tray is way longer than it really needs to be, so you can adjust the CG on the tray and fine-tune with the lock positions. It's a really well thought out design. It's really nice. I don't have a price on these battery trays just yet. I'm sure they'll be reasonable. I'm looking forward to picking up a couple extras myself. The lock itself is pretty straightforward. It is a simple spring-loaded pin with a handle that you can slide back and lock open. It attaches to the tray. Again, since the side frames are universal, the battery tray as well, you can have the lock on the left side or the right side, whichever way you prefer the best. I have mine set up with a lock on the driver's side, so my tray will end up locked like that. One quick note, I learned the hard way. It'd be real easy to assume that this little roll pin was press fit. That would be a mistake. In the manual it does note that you need to remove this handle and Loctite this. Don't ask me how I know, but if you don't remember to Loctite that, you will lose it in flight. Make getting the batteries out a little extra step. Kind of reach through the frames, but it can be done. But again, a couple seconds here with some red Loctite. You should never ever have to take that apart again. I'd be tempted to use green, except that I have the wicking kind, and I don't want to get any Loctite in my clamp lock assembly. So we're going to use red so I can control it. The lock is held on the tray with 2 metric cap screws. Looks like M3s. Pretty straightforward. These pieces are available separately, so if you should lose one or break one, or God forbid this E-clip come off, all these parts are replaceable. You're not sunk by a whole new lock assembly if you don't have to. You can even buy the pin by itself if you have to. Again, unfortunately, I know the hard way. I'm going to take a second and Loctite these couple parts, put the tray together, and then I'm going to double check my epoxy.